Well, hello everyone, and good morning. This is your girl Audrey Connor, and I am here to kind of help those that are thinking about a new year, new me. So, if that is you, I want to hear from you. Go ahead and put it in the chat. Now, there are a couple of things that is going on. There are some people that are thinking about going back to school, and that's awesome. I really applaud those people. There's some people that are thinking about going back to school, and that's awesome. I really applaud those people that are thinking about, I'm already here. All right. So if you're thinking about going back to school, maybe going to get your GED, maybe you're thinking about going into the military and you need help on your ASVAT, as well as if you're thinking about going to a course back in the community college and they are going to give you this assessment called the Accuplacer so they can figure out where or what class they should place you in. And we all know if we try to get ourselves into that lower course, you're going to spend like a good 2, sometimes 3 years before you get into an accredited math class. So it all depends on where you test in on that Accuplacer. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to basically help you guys with your step-by-steps, and especially on the areas that a lot of people lose points on. So especially for the GED, anything that's going to be dealing with linear equations, they're going to rank high on the test. So if you think about it, a lot of people will say that, oh, okay, well, the test is just like 1 point per question. No. Some tests have a range. And I know especially for the GED, you can either get a point for one, a question for like 2 points, 3 points, or 4 points. Now, anything dealing with linear equations is definitely a 4-pointer. So we definitely want to kind of reach in and do well on these assessments. So if you're coming in and you just want to write and just follow along, you can most certainly do that. So this time we're going to be working on what's called standard form. So standard form, we have this AX plus BY equals C. And you're like, what are these letters? Why we got so many letters going on here? Well, the A, the B, and the C, they represent numbers. So since they could be a positive number, it could be a negative number, it could be a decimal, it could be a fraction, anything of the above, you can actually plug in numbers to find it. Now, I did one a little bit about a couple days ago. Let me see if I can find it. It might be the previous page. Yes, it is. Okay, we were talking about what's called slope-intercept form. So slope-intercept form is just simply that y equals mx plus b. So basically your equation is solved for y. And we needed 2 things to make an equation with a line. We need the slope, which is your rise over run, and you need a y-intercept, which is your b, or your starting point. But having that in mind, there's a quicker way for you to graph by using what's called intercepts. So I already mentioned one. So now I'm going to mention the other intercept. So we have a y-intercept. So basically where it crosses the y-axis. And that's when your x value is going to equal 0. The other one is called an x-intercept. Ooh, handwriting is terrible today. And the x-intercept is when your y value is equal to 0. So thank you guys for coming and stopping on in. I appreciate it. So when we're looking at the y's and the x-intercepts, and if they give us an equation, we can substitute that 0 for the x value, and we could substitute the 0 for the y value to actually find what those intercepts are. So let's say, for example, we have 4x minus 2y equals negative 12. So if you're trying to solve this, it will work best. Hey, thanks. How are you? So it will work best instead of you solving this out for that slope-intercept form that I was talking about. We're going to do some substitution, and we're going to substitute zeros for the x and then substitute 0 for the y, and we're going to solve. So if I substitute, let's say we're going to use the y-intercept. So that means I'm going to substitute the x value for 0. So we all know anything times 0 is 0. So since 0 is also known as a placeholder, I don't really need this anymore. So a lot of people are like, okay, well, what do I do with the 0? You don't really need it because on the same side of the equal sign, we got that negative 2y. So I'm just going to bring down the negative 2y equals negative 12. And notice that I'm using my paper. I'm writing in between the dots, but if I want to make them bigger, I can make them bigger as well. So now, let me cover some things up because this is the one thing a lot of people get confused on. What should I do next? So now you're just going to focus on that negative 2y equals negative 12. So negative 2y, if I'm doing one-step solving, this means negative 2 times y. The opposite or the inverse of multiplication is division. So whatever I do on one side, I have to do on the other side. So negative 2 divided by negative 2 gives me 1. So I can say 1 and bring down the y. But here's the thing. 1y means exactly the same as just saying y. So a negative divided by a negative gives me a positive. Anytime the signs are the same, your answer is always going to be positive. Then 12 divided by 2, that gives me 6. So 1y equals 6, or you can say y equals 6. What you found is your y-intercept. So we substitute a 0 for the x, and we got a 6 for our y. So that's our y-intercept. This is where it's going to cross on the y-axis. Remember, the y-axis goes up and down. So now we're going to take that same equation. Whoops. We're going to take that same equation, but this time we're going to substitute 0 for the y value. So if I rewrite it, actually, let me put it in pen. I know, math and pen, I'm being dangerous. So we got 4x minus 2 times our y, but instead of the y, we're going to plug a 0 in. And that's going to still equal negative 12. So you're probably wondering, oh, did it seep through, Audrey, because you're using pen? Because, you know, most of these papers are cheap. Do you see it seep through? No? You just see the whole translation, but you can still see the grid. All right? So now, anything times 0, and what I mean by that is this negative 2 times 0. So that negative 2 times 0, that gives me 0. Then I have my 4x, and that equals negative 12. But just like I said earlier, we don't need that 0 because we don't need it as a placeholder because 4x is on the same side with that 0. So I'm just bringing down my 4x and then bring down the equals and the negative 12. So 4x is the same as saying 4 times x. So the opposite or the inverse of 4 times x will be 4 divided. So I'm going to divide the 4 on both sides. 4 divided by 4 gives me 1. Negative 12 divided by a positive 4, the signs are different. When the signs are different through multiplication and division, your answer is always going to be negative. When the signs are different through multiplication and division, your answer is always going to be negative. And 12 divided by 4 is 3. So 1x equals negative 3 or x equals negative 3. So what you found here is the x-intercept. So my x value always comes before the y. Think of the alphabet. So my x is a negative 3, but my y value was 0. So now we have 2 points to graph our line. That's the minimal that we need in order to graph. So handy dandy pencils, because I'm going to draw our grid. So I'm using my points, draw lines. And since I'm talking about 6 and 3, I think I'm going to draw this one over here. Yep, old schooling it. There's nothing wrong with the old school, right? So using my bubbles. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I like to make my 5s a little bit bigger. And this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we got our negatives. Okay, so by having all of this, hey Kristen, having all of this down, my graph looks not so wonky, right? That's why I kind of like to have the dot grid instead of like an actual grid. So now we're going to graph. So I'm going to be using 2 different colors. I'm going to use my y-intercept, I'm going to use in blue, and then my x-intercept, I'm going to keep it in red. So y-intercept, I always start at the 0. So if I'm going to point 0, 6, I don't have an x value. That means I'm not doing any running. But I do have a rise at 6. So I go up to 6 and I make my first point. Okay, so that is going to be 0, 6. So now I'm doing my my x-intercept. So my x-intercept starting at the 0, it's saying I have to go to the left because it's negative, left 3. Coming over to the 3, but I don't have a rise. I don't have a 0, so I don't have to go up. I'm just plotting my point. And by looking at the graph, you probably notice, hey, wait a minute. I got a slope here. Let me graph that. So you got a slope here, and you're probably like, all right, it looks like when I read it from left to right, it looks like it's going upwards. So now let's draw our line to really indicate what a slope is actually doing. And from left to right, as my x values are increasing, my y values are also increasing. So we have a positive slope. And M represents our slope. Okay? Oh, thank you for the follow, Olivia. So with this going step by step, okay? So we're actually just using the intercepts to graph our line. So if you're taking a test, okay? All right, oh, thank you for showing some love. From where we find -6, what do you mean from where we find -6? Afghanistan, if you can verbalize, I would greatly appreciate that. All right, so when you're doing these, you might not have to put it in slope-intercept form. You can only use, or you could use the intercepts to help find those 2 points that you need to graph. Now, if they ask you, all right, what is the slope? Now we can do the rise over run from one point to the next. So I like to say, all right, this is my house. I always start at the lowest part. I don't know why. I said, this is my house and I want to go to my friend's house. So I need to go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 blocks. So since I went up, that's going to be a +6. And then from this point, I need to run over 1, 2, 3. And since I went to the right, that's a +3. So if I want to know my slope is my rise over my run. So with the rise over run, I rose 6 units and then I ran 3 units. But 6 divided by 3, that could be simplified. So if I want to, what is 6 divided by 3? And I'm praying to all things holy that you guys are saying too. So if you want to, you can simplify it and say 2 over 1 to keep with the ruling. Or you can give me the whole number of 2. So that means if I wanted to find a point on this line, I can find this rule, 2 over 1. So if let me grab my purple pen. If I start here and I go up 1, 2, and over 1, that's a point on the line. If I go up 1, 2, over 1, that's a point on the line. If I want to go in the reverse, down 2, but to the left 1, if I drew it properly, that will be on the line. So slopes, you can go up in the positive direction, you can go to the double times in the negative direction, but we know going up is positive, going to the right is positive, going down is negative, going to the left is negative. So that's what we're basically doing here. Okay, I'm going to try one more and then we're going to kind of close this off because I have to get myself ready for tutoring. All right, so if I use, let's say this 1/2. Let's put some fractions in here. Why not? Let's zhuzh it up. So let's say 1/2 x plus y is equal to -1. Okay? The reason why I know it's in standard form, because my x and my y is on the same side of the equation. So I could simplify this by changing it into slope-intercept form, which means I would have to remove this 1/2 x from this side and put it over here, or I can use my intercepts. All right, so if I want to, I can say I have my 0, y. So that means I'm going to make my x values 0. So that means I have 1/2 times 0 plus y equals -1. Anything times 0 is 0. So that means that placeholder does not have to be there. What's left is going to be y equals -1. So what you found is your y-intercept, which is at 0, -1. So that's one of your points. I'm going to try to squeeze it on in here. I'll use my blue pen. So if I have my 1/2 x plus 0, because we're trying to find our x-intercept, equals -1, that means we have 1/2 x is equal to -1. We don't have to bring down the plus 0 because we don't need it as a placeholder since we already have this 1/2 x. Thank you so much for the love. All right. So now we're trying to solve this for x. 1/2 is the same as saying 1 divided by 2. What's the inverse of x? 1/2 is the same as saying 1 divided by 2. What's the inverse of division? Okay, hopefully you're saying multiplication. Is this so? So, how do I multiply a fraction? Now, I'm basically going to take its denominator and multiply both sides by its denominator. Or some people like to say, multiply by the reciprocal. The reciprocal of 1/2, you flip it. That means it's going to be 2 over 1. So I like to do it this way, because now when I multiply 2 times 1, that gives me 2. And 1 times 2, that gives me 2. And now I got 2 divided by 2. which gives me 1x, or just x. So over here, when you multiply a whole number with a fraction, we want to put that whole number into a fraction by putting it over 1. So now you got negative 2 over 1, because negative 1 times 2 gives me negative 2, and 1 times 1 gives me 1. And that means negative 2 divided by 1, that gives me a negative 2. So when you see possibly your teachers or maybe some other tutors and you see them doing this, they're doing what's called cross simplifying, because 2 divided by 2 gives me 1, 1 divided by 1 gives me 1, and we know that 1 divided by 1 will just give me 1. So what they do is, the reason why they're doing this is they want to eliminate that coefficient of 1/2. So when you multiply by its inverse and reciprocal, they cancel out. So that will be the shortcut. That's the reason why you're doing this. So now, let's summarize. You just found negative 2, 0. You found the x-intercept. All right? So exactly, Afghanistan. Thank you. All right. So now we got our 2 points. So I'm going to squeeze, because I ran out of some room. I'm going to squeeze in a little graph. Well, since it's like negative 1, negative 2, I don't have to make it too large. So we got this, and then we go over here. All right. That's my y-axis, because y goes up and down. This is my x-axis, left and right. All right. So could have made that slash a little bit neater, but here we are. Now, we have our y-intercept. So our y-intercept is negative 1. So 0, negative 1, starting at the origin at 0. I'm going to go down 1. This is my first point. I like to call it the starting point. So that is going to be at 0, negative 1. Thank you for the love, everyone. So now we have our second point, negative 2, 0. So if I'm starting at the origin, negative 2, that means I'm going to the left 2, 1, 2. And the 0, that means I don't have a rise. I can just plot my point right there. And this is at negative 2, 0. So as you can see, we have our 2 points. So if we need those 2 points, we can actually connect them so we can figure out what our slope is and the equation of the line, if they ever tell you to graph it. So now we're going to really have to do some construction here because I'm going at it blind. All right. So you can tell that from the left to the right, we have a negative slope. Okay. So if they ask you, what is the slope? All you have to do is go from one point to the next. So if this is my house and I want to go to my friend's house, I'm starting here. I'm going down 1. So that'll be a negative 1. And to the right, 1, 2, which is going to be a positive 2. So since I went down, that was my rise. That was a negative 1. And I went to the right 2. That's a positive 2. That's my slope. So my slope is going to be a negative 1/2. So if they ask you to graph, you can use the intercepts. Sometimes the intercept is quick, sometimes it's not. Me personally, it's like you want to kind of get a feel for it. Like the last one that we did, I would put that in slope intercept form. The reason why I would put it in slope intercept form is because y doesn't have a coefficient. So since y doesn't have a coefficient, that means I can simply just subtract 1x, 1/2 x on both sides. So if I did that, I would eliminate a lot of this work, but I wanted to show you so you get to pick and choose. So what I'm saying, I'm going to put it up here. I got my 1/2 x plus y is equal to negative 1. If I subtract 1/2 x on both sides, I would get y equals negative 1/2 x minus 1. This, let me clean that up a bit. My goodness. It's going to be an interesting day of tutoring because this handwriting is broke. All right. So if I'm saying that, if you notice right here, it says my slope was negative 1/2. Isn't that the same thing that we found down here? You see how, and this is what things that as a tutor, and even when I was a classroom teacher, that drove me nuts with a lot of my colleagues, when they always say that there's one way of solving. No, there isn't. You can get the same answer in multiple ways. But this is why I think I do well and I connect well with my students, is because since you have multiple ways of solving, I like to talk to my students to figure out which way works best for them. And I know when I was in the classroom and I had like 5 different ways, trust me, it was crazy, but some people were like, I want to try Victor's way. Awesome. Give it a try. See if that works for you. Or like, oh, I want to try like Julia's way. All right, good. And then next thing you know, there is some discussion. Now, all of a sudden, I'm not the dictator of the classroom. So that's one of the reasons why I kept in mind when I designed this notebook. Yes, I designed this, right? So this is my ultimate math notebook. And I basically designed it for those students that are 7th grade, always to adults. And with this, I always give like words of affirmation in the beginning. You can have a table of contents because if you notice on the bottom of the pages, they're all, let's see if I can get it. Okay, they're all numbered. So if you're one of those people that love super organization, you can have that there. If you have a child or maybe yourself, you have notes that was given to the teacher and they said, I want you to keep this in your notebook, you can tape it in on the graphing side. And then what I like to do is tell my students on the note side, summarize what's on that paper. So it's almost like literally, I want you to summarize what's on this paper because that's the part that's missing in a lot of our classrooms. A lot of them are given packets and packets of notes, but they're not reflecting back on the notes. It's like, okay, I copied what the teacher wrote on the board. And then when I ask my students, like, so what does this mean to you? They have no clue. So by actually having them copy down, so what does this mean to you? They have no clue. So by actually having them copy down, so what does this mean to you? They have no clue. So by actually having them copy down, sorry about that. Are we back? Let's see. Okay, I think we're going to be coming back on here in a second. All right, so sorry about that. Hopefully I got that situated. It's just basically telling me like, you got a person in less than half an hour. Got it. So what happens is a lot of kids, they generally get packets. And when they get packets of paper, they just basically summarize, they write what the teacher says and they don't take to heart what they're actually learning. But by actually having them write it down to summarize it, and then also write down the steps. So let me go back to where we are because you'll see several examples that I've been doing. Here we are. You teach online because my child comes from this in the United States. Yes. All right. I definitely do teach online. This is just my thing. I love it. I mean, I'm starting to be really popular in Alaska. Don't know how that happened. I know I taught one kid, and next thing you know, I got 4 kids in Alaska. So we're like Alaska, we're in California, Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, obviously, because that's where I'm at. Oops. All of a sudden, things are going dark. Okay. So if anything, we're going to take down the steps. So one thing you want to make sure it's in slope intercept form. I mean, in standard form. So you're going to sub. So I want to say substitute. We have our 0 for our y. So this will be for our y-intercept. And then we're going to substitute 0 for our x's. Okay. Then you're going to solve. So I'm going to say solve for x equals and solve for y equals. And then you'll get combine your ordered pair, or create your ordered pairs. Then you're going to plot your points. After you plot your points, you can draw your line because we're graphing. Now, when you draw your line, don't just go from point to point. That's a segment. When you want a line, you want the full effect, okay? So if they ever say draw a line, don't just stop from point to point. Make sure you draw a full line. Okay, so you want to draw your line. And if they ask for the slope, remember, I'm just going to put this as a side note. If you need the slope, remember your slope is your rise over your run. Okay, so if they ever ask as a side note, what is that slope? That's what you're looking for, with your rise over the run. Now, you definitely want to do it, especially if we reflect on the first one. I would do the standard form using your intercepts when you have a number in front of the x and in front of the y. But if you ever have something like this 1/2 x plus y equals -1, I would do it using our slope intercept form, which is this one, which I'm highlighting. Because then you can get to your answers so much quicker. And that's what you want to do. Because remember, this test is a timed assessment. Okay, so you definitely want to hold on to when it's like a timed assessment. All right. So, as I said before, this is my ultimate math notebook. I have one this is from 7th to adults. It's not just these note pages. Okay, so yes, I have this section, and yes, I do have grids. So if you want to do more practice problems, you have the grid paper on the other side. Then you can actually do some extra side work over here. You can, as I showed you, you can tape stuff on this side. That's perfectly fine. But you have 100 pages of those note sections. But then this is what makes it the ultimate notebook. If you have kids that struggles, you're like, ooh, colors. Yes, if you have kids that struggle with their multiplication task, I have what's called a factor chart. So my factor sheets, most factor sheets that you see online, it goes from 1 to 100. Now, mine goes from 1 to 200. Because since we're dealing with larger numbers, we're dealing with our older kids. And a lot of them are dealing with 3-digit numbers, and anything after 100, they struggle. The struggle is real. They struggle with. They don't know what will be a prime number. And they're like, say, for example, 149. They will say, oh, 49's in it. That means it's divisible by 7. No. Okay. So if I go to 149, let me see if I can put it in here. I know we're all kinds of crazy. There it is. Okay. 149. That's a prime number. Okay. So You'll have kids will spend a good 5, 10, 15 minutes trying to figure out. Later on, they're like, wait, I can't break it down. Of course you can't break it down. It's prime. All right, so that's what I do. I make all my primes be yellow, all of my perfect roots. So 121, if I did the square root of 121, that is a perfect square root. Okay, 11 times 11. And then you're probably seeing numbers in red. This is what I use to help our kids break down radicals. So if they have like square roots, so let's say they're trying to find the square root of, 164. Okay, since it's kind of here. So we got 164. So I go to 164 and I got the factors of 1 and 64, 2 and 82, and 4 and 41. Hey, that is going to be a perfect prime combination. The reason why I say that is because the square root of 4 is 2, is a whole number of 2. Whereas the square root of 41, that's prime. So if I can go straight to it, break it down, and then continue to solve or simplify or add or whatever they're trying to do, now you're taking less time. You're taking less pressure off of their heads. So I have those. In addition to that, word problems. Okay? So most used words. That is basically used on almost every word problem is going to be here. I have phrases for addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, equals. You'll be amazed how many kids will get that wrong. And inequalities, definitely this one. Is more than and more than is not the same thing. Because of that word is, we're talking about an inequality. Is less than and less than, that's not the same thing. Less than means subtraction. Is less than is an inequality. So these are the things that a lot of our students get screwed up, and then all of a sudden they get frustrated and then they stop. But if they can see the separation of it, and this is also another reason why I put it in color, this is why it's expensive, so people can see it so much clearer. Other thing, I know, it's this thing that's in the way. Other thing is the rules of integers. Okay, what's the rules of integers for addition? With examples. Subtraction with examples. And then multiplication and division, as I said, is kind of a little cleaned up with the one inside, but that's there as well. Then the version that's on Amazon right now is completely updated because each of these have its own bubbles. So you can see it so much clearer. Okay, so we got the rate of change. Here's that standard form that we were talking about. Okay, and then we have our equation of the line, the point slope form, which I am going to talk about, not today, but at a later time. All right, so all this is here. Order of operations. What's happening in the U.S., please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, and also for the international version, okay? Very similar, and I love showing this, but what happens is they switch the multiplication and division, and they kept the addition and subtraction. So it always depends on what happens from left to right. That's the part that people gets mixed up. I'm actually going to do an example of that one day. Then the properties of exponents, all that's there. Then this is when it starts getting a little more advanced. Now we're looking at volume. So we're looking at surface area. We're looking at volume, the formulas of that. Not only just the area of the circle and the circumference, but also the equation of the circle. We're looking at the sectors, how to find the area of the sector, and also arc length. So this is something that you're going to see for your advanced students, not just in Algebra 1. Yeah, we got Pythagorean's theorem. That's never going away. And then also our SOHCAHTOA with the inverse, okay? Then we also have the different identities, the reciprocal identities, the quotient identities, Pythagorean identities, negative angle identity, and the sine and cosine rule. For us to break all those down, I will be adding the cofunctions in my new book. I don't know why I forgot about that. This you're going to see in Algebra 2. This is you're going to see also in geometry for those that have like separate rules. And then the unit circle. Oh, Algebra 2 people, this is going to be your thing. All students take calculus. You're going to need this unit circle. This is going to be your saving grace. So all of that is in here. In addition to this, we also have brain breaks. You know, after you do math for a little bit, you just need a moment. You just need to get yourself together. So I have brain breaks, some puzzles in here. So for students and for adults, just to take a moment, a little, Sudoku. Also, maybe like a little coloring if you want to do, if you have your color pens, erasable color pens if you want. Also, if people are into pixel art, I got a little something here. But then if you just want to doodle or sketch, you got that section there. So this is basically it. This is my math notebook. Okay, this is the 7th to adult, but then I also designed one for 4th and 6th grades. So I do have the paperback copies. They are definitely on Amazon, but I also have digital copies if you just want to print whatever sections out for yourselves. That's on sale on my website. If you want to take a screenshot of this, put it on your computer, and then take your phone to go to it, you can. You can also go to my website, was ACG Math Tutoring, which I will update this paper. But if you are a person that's interested in learning how to pass the Accuplacer, how to pass the ASVAT, the GED, I'd still have some spots available, but I'm also developing a course for you that's going to be self-paced. In addition to the self-paced, I will be offering what's called office hours. So then you can ask your questions while you're doing with this. That's the one thing that I see that's missing with a lot of courses, that, you're great with it. And then all of a sudden you got a question and they're like, I don't know who to ask. So if you're interested in it, just go ahead and scan this. It's going to take you to a contact form just to fill it out. And then I'm going to get in touch with you so we can figure out where you want to go. So Ultimate Math Notebooks, definitely we have the 7th grade adults, which we just used today. And the same thing happens with 4th and 6th. But the only thing that's different with the 4th and 6th is that on the grid side, I made the grids a lot bigger. So students could actually write numbers inside to keep their place values in line. I don't know if it's just me being OCD, but I need that. Because I see, if you ever look at your kid's notebook that's in 4th or 5th grade, it's like, and I feel like I'm getting seasick when I'm looking at their notes. So that's why I made the grids a lot bigger so they can get their place values together and give them room to write notes. All right, guys. Well, I have to get myself ready for my crazy day of tutoring, which I'm loving it. I miss my kids. I haven't seen them for about 2 weeks due to the holiday. But I will try to come back on here later on today, or try to really get a date and a time that works. But I want you to have an amazing day. Remember, the first step that you take, if it's not with me, if it's with someone else, that's great. The fact that you took a first step towards making yourself better, I am so proud of you. All right. So I have to get going, but if you have any questions whatsoever, you can shoot me a message and then we can just take it from there. All right. Have an amazing day, guys. Peace out.